The great hall of Ravensborg stood silent as death itself. Torches flickered against stone walls, carved with the faces of forgotten gods, their eyes hollow and judging. The air hung thick with the scent of pine, smoke, and blood, always blood, in these northern lands where winter never truly released its grip. Queen Astrid sat upon the high seat, her spine straight as a sword, her silver crown catching the firelight like frozen lightning. Around her, the gathered jarls and their warriors waited, breath held, eyes fixed on the massive oak doors that had just burst open. The wind howled through the opening, bringing with it snow and the metallic taste of coming storms. And then he appeared, Thorvald the Unbroken, so they had called him once. Champion of the borderlands, slayer of the Danes who dared cross into their territory, bearer of 17 scars and twice as many victories. His name had been sung in every mead hall from the fjords to the mountains, but the man who now staggered through those doors bore little resemblance to the legend. His armor hung in tatters, leather straps cut clean through, iron plates dented and bent like crushed flowers. Blood painted him from crown to heel, so much blood it was impossible to tell where wounds ended and whole flesh began. His left arm dangled useless at his side. His right hand still gripped his sword, though the blade dragged against stone, leaving a trail of sparks and crimson. Each step was a battle against gravity itself. The warriors lining the hall had fought beside him, celebrated with him, sworn oaths in his name. Yet now they stood frozen, uncertain whether they witnessed a man or a ghost walking. Thorvald's eyes, grey as winter seas, found the queen. Only her. He took another step, then another. The hall stretched all before him like an impossible distance, though it measured no more than 50 paces. His breathing came in wet, rattling gasps that echoed off the ancient stones. 20 paces from the throne, his leg buckled. He caught himself, sword point jamming into the floor, keeping him upright through sheer will. Sweat mixed with blood on his brow. His lips moved, forming words that never found voice. 10 paces. The queen's fingers tightened on the arms of her seat. Her face remained carved from ice, but something flickered in her eyes. Something the gathered warriors would debate in whispers for years to come. 5 paces. Thorvald's sword clattered to the ground. The sound rang like a death knell through the silent hall. 3 paces. His knees struck stone, and there at the feet of Queen Astrid, the Unbroken finally broke. He collapsed forward, one hand reaching out, falling short of her feet by mere inches. His breath came in shallow, desperate pulls. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across stone that had witnessed 1,000 such deaths, 1,000 failed warriors, 1,000 broken oaths. The queen rose. The movement rippled through the hall like lightning through storm clouds. Warriors straightened. Hands moved to sword hilts. The tension grew so thick it could be tasted. No one approached a queen unbidden. No one bled upon the sacred stones of the high seat and lived. The laws were older than memory, carved not in runes, but in bone and tradition and the frozen earth itself. Astrid descended the 3 steps of the throne dais. Her advisors moved to intercept, old Bjorn with his grey beard and worried eyes, young Sven with his hand on his blade, ready to protect his queen from this dying man. She stopped them with a single raised hand. The queen knelt. Gasps echoed through the hall. Someone's weapon scraped against stone. Somewhere in the back, a woman's voice began a prayer to the old gods, then fell silent as if strangled. Astrid knelt in Thorvald's blood, her white gown drinking in the red like thirsty earth. She reached out, her fingers, adorned with rings of silver and amber, touching his face, turning it toward her. His eyes opened, barely, but they found hers. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the perfect silence. "What have you seen?" Thorvald's lips moved. Blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. The words came, broken, separated by breaths that might be his last. "They are coming." The queen leaned closer. "Who?" "All of them." And then his eyes closed. His body went still, and the hall erupted into chaos. But before we continue this journey into darkness and destiny, into the secrets that Thorvald carried back from the edge of death itself, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your strength keeps these legends alive, just as the Queen's choice in this moment would keep alive something the North had never seen before. The question that burned in every mind. As the healers rushed forward, as the warriors shouted and the advisors demanded answers, was simple and terrible. What would the Queen do with a man who had broken protocol, violated sacred law, and collapsed at her feet with a warning that could mean the end of everything? The answer would change. The fate of kingdoms. The Queen's chambers had been transformed into a battlefield of another kind. Thorvald lay upon furs and linens on a great bed that had once held kings, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uncertain rhythms. The room smelled of sage and yarrow, of crushed herbs and heated iron. Steam rose from basins where water boiled over braziers, turning the air thick and close. Astrid had ordered her personal healers, women who served no god, but the ancient knowledge passed down through generations of mothers and daughters. They moved around the dying warrior with practiced efficiency, cutting away ruined armor, cleaning wounds, speaking in low voices that held no panic, but plenty of concern. The Queen stood at the window watching snow fall over Ravensborg. Behind her, the head healer, a woman called Inga, whose age could have been 40 or 400, worked with needle and thread, closing the worst of the gashes that decorated Thorvald's body like a map of violence. He should be dead, Inga said, not looking up from her work. Should have died on whatever battlefield birthed these wounds. Should have died on the journey back. Should have died the moment he fell. But he didn't. Astrid's breath fogged the cold glass. No, he didn't. Inga tied off another stitch with practiced fingers, which means either the gods aren't finished with him, or they're playing a joke none of us will find funny. The door opened without knock or announcement, a privilege held by only 3 people in all of Ravensborg. Bjorn entered, his weathered face set in lines of deep disapproval. "The Jarls are demanding answers," he said. "They want to know why their queen kneels in blood for a common warrior, why she breaks every tradition, why she brings him to her own. Chambers like... He trailed off, unable or unwilling to speak the implications aloud. Astrid turned from the window. In the firelight, her face could have been carved from the same stone as the hall's pillars, beautiful, cold, and absolutely unyielding. Thorvald is not a common warrior. He is not of royal blood. He's the only man who came back. Her words cut like winter wind. 300 warriors marched south to meet the border threat 6 weeks ago. 300 of our finest, and only one returned. Do you not think that fact alone earns him a bed and a healer's attention? Bjorn's jaw worked. The law was written in times of peace. Astrid moved to the bedside, looking down at Thorvald's pale face. These are not such times. The old advisor studied his queen, seeing perhaps what others missed, the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the weight she carried that had nothing to do with crowns and everything to do with the impossible task of keeping a kingdom alive through winter and war. "What did he tell you?" Bjorn asked quietly, in the hall, before he collapsed. What were his words? That they are coming, all of them. Who? He didn't say. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of fire and Thorvald's labored breathing. Bjorn moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There are rumors, tales from traders and wanderers. They speak of an alliance, of jarls and kings who should be enemies, now joined under a single banner. They speak of an army larger than any the North has seen since the old wars. An army with one purpose." Astrid's fingers traced the edge of the bed. "My throne. You are unmarried. You are young. You hold power that many believe belongs to men alone." Bjorn's words carried no judgment, only truth. "Half the northern lords would see you wed or dead. If they unite, then Ravensborg falls." She said it simply, without fear, as one states the color of the sky. "Unless you marry, take a powerful jarl as husband, unite the territories through blood and oath, become a decoration in my own hall." Astrid's smile held no warmth. "A womb to produce heirs, while men make the real decisions. No, old friend, I would rather burn this kingdom to ash than surrender it on bending knee." Thorvald stirred. The movement was slight, a twitch of fingers, a turn of the head, but it stopped all conversation. Inga leaned over him, checking pulse and breathing, lifting his eyelids to study his pupils in the firelight. "He's fighting back," the healer announced. "The fever is strong, but his will is stronger. He may yet see morning." "Stay with him," Astrid commanded. "I want to know the moment he wakes, the moment he can speak." "And if he doesn't wake?" Bjorn asked. The queen moved toward the door, her blood-stained gown trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. "Then we face what's coming blind. But if he wakes, if he can tell us what he saw, where this army gathers, who leads them." She paused at the threshold. "Then perhaps we have a chance. And if what he tells us is worse than we imagine?" Astrid looked back at the broken warrior who had crawled through snow and pain to bring his warning. "Then at least we'll know the true shape of our doom." She left, the door closing behind her with a sound like fate sealing itself shut. In the bed, Thorvald's breathing deepened, his fingers curled, and behind closed eyelids his eyes moved, seeing battles and betrayals that would soon spill into the waking world. The snow fell heavier. Outside, winter was only beginning. 3 days passed before Thorvald opened his eyes, 3 days during which Ravensborg held its breath. Warriors sharpened blades that were already sharp. Scouts returned with reports of nothing. No armies, no threats, just the endless white silence of northern winter. The Jarls grew restless, their demands for explanation growing louder. But in the Queen's chambers, time moved differently. Inga kept her vigil, changing bandages, administering draughts of willow bark and feverfew. Astrid visited each evening, though she said nothing, simply sitting in the high-backed chair by the fire, watching the warrior sleep, and perhaps wondering what truths or terrors lived behind those closed eyes. On the 3rd night, as snow scratched against windows and wind howled like wolves denied their prey, Thorvald's eyes opened. Inga saw it first, the change from the unfocused stare of fever to the sharp awareness of a man returning to himself. She moved to the door, spoke quietly to the guard, and within moments the Queen arrived, still dressed in the simple wool tunic she wore for evening councils. Thorvald's gaze found her across the room. "Am I dead?" His voice came rough as stone grinding stone. "Not yet." Astrid approached the bed, "though you tried your best to achieve it." He attempted to sit up. Pain flashed across his face and he fell back, gasping. "Easy," Inga commanded, pressing a cup to his lips. "Drink slowly." He drank. The liquid, some mixture of herbs and honey, sliding down his throat like liquid life. When he finished, his eyes closed briefly, then opened again, clearer than before. "How long?" he asked. 3 days, Astrid said. 3 days while my kingdom prepares for a threat we cannot name. 3 days while you heal in my own chambers. A decision that half my advisors believe is madness. They're right to think so. Thorvald's attempt at a smile became a grimace. A queen should not kneel in blood for a dying warrior, perhaps, but a queen must do what a kingdom requires. Tradition be damned. She pulled the chair closer, sitting so that their eyes were level. "Now tell me what happened to 300 warriors. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what's coming." Thorvald's gaze went distant, seeing not the warm chamber, but something else. Something written in fire and blood. "We reached the borderlands as the ordered," he began, each word measured, controlled. The reports had spoken of Danish raiders, nothing more. 100 men at most, testing our defenses, taking livestock and supplies. We expected a quick battle, a warning delivered in steel. He paused, swallowing hard. We were wrong. Outside, the wind intensified, as if the earth itself listened. They were waiting. Not 100 Danes, thousands, and not just Danes. Warriors from every territory that borders Ravensborg. Men who should have been enemies to each other, now fighting as brothers, all under one banner. What banner, Astrid? Leaned forward. A black raven with a crown in its talons. Thorvald's hands clenched into fists beneath the furs, the symbol of Harald Bloodaxe. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Inga inhaled sharply. Even Astrid, who had trained herself to show no emotion, could not prevent the slight widening of her eyes. Harald Bloodaxe. The Jarl from the Eastern Territories, who had declared himself king 5 years past, whose ambition was matched only by his brutality. A man who believed the North should be united under one rule, his rule, no matter how many bodies it required, to pave that path. Harold, Astrid breathed, but he has no claim to Ravensborg, no blood ties, no ancient right. He doesn't need blood ties, Thorvald's voice hardened. He has something better. He has promises. To every Jarl who joins him, he offers land from conquered territories. To every warrior, he offers silver and glory. To every lord who bends the knee, he offers power. And to those who refuse, he offers death. The fire cracked and popped, the only sound in the heavy silence. We fought, Thorvald continued, the words coming faster now, as if released from some dam inside him. Gods, we fought. Your warriors were brave, my queen, braver than songs will ever capture. They stood against impossible odds and made Harold's army pay in blood for every inch of ground. His voice broke slightly, but it wasn't enough. We were surrounded, outnumbered 10-1. They had planned it perfectly, letting us march deep into their trap before closing it. By nightfall of the first day, half our forces were dead. By dawn of the second, only 100 remained. By the time the sun set again, he stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. Astrid spoke for him. You were only one left. I should have died with them, would have gladly. But Ragnar, you remember Ragnar, your shield-bearer? He found me near the end, bleeding, half-conscious. He dragged me to the tree line, while the others made a final stand, used his own body to shield me from arrows. His last words, Thorvald's jaw tightened. He said, "Tell the queen, warn her, do not let her fall without knowing what's coming." Then he went back to die with the others. The room seemed to contract, becoming smaller, tighter, as if the weight of those deaths pressed in from all sides. How long? Astrid asked, her voice steady despite everything. How long until Harold's army reaches Ravensborg? They're moving slowly, gathering more allies, more warriors, but they're coming. I estimate 6 weeks, perhaps 8 if winter slows them. But they are coming, my queen, and when they arrive, we fall. She said it simply, without drama. Even if we call every able body to the walls, even if we prepare every defense, Harold's numbers will overwhelm us. Yes, and if I surrender, if I bend knee, offer marriage, accept his terms, Thorvald met her eyes. Then you become his captive, instead of his corpse. Is that better? Only you can answer. Astrid rose from the chair, moving back to the window. Snow had piled against the glass, creating patterns like frost runes that might have been omens or simply weather. Ragnar gave his life so that I would know, she said quietly, so that I would have time to choose. Stand and die, or kneel and lose everything that makes Ravensborg worth defending. There may be another way, Thorvald ventured. She turned. What way? Harold's alliance is built on greed and ambition. Such alliances are strong until they're not. If someone could drive a wedge between the Jarls, make them question Harold's promises, turn them against each other. You speak of politics and intrigue, of the games that queens and diplomats play. Astrid's expression remained unreadable. But such games require time we don't have and trust we can't build. Then what will you do? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Astrid looked at the warrior who had crawled back from death to deliver his warning, who had lost everything and everyone to carry out a fallen comrade's final command, who now lay broken in her chambers, still, ready to fight if called upon. I don't know, she admitted, and the honesty in those words carried more weight than any certainty could. But I know this, I will not surrender. Not my kingdom, not my throne, not my people. If Ravensborg falls, it will fall with me standing on its walls, blade in hand. Then you'll need more than courage, Thorvald said. You'll need a miracle, or an army of ghosts to match Harold's living horde. She offered a smile that held more sadness than humor. Rest now. Heal. I'll need every warrior I can muster, and you've already proven you're worth 20. Ordinary men. She moved toward the door. My queen, Thorvald called out, stopping her. Why did you kneel? In the hall when I fell, you broke every law, every tradition. Why? Astrid paused, her hand on the door. Because in that moment I saw not a warrior collapsing at my feet. I saw the only man brave enough or mad enough to carry truth through death and pain and impossible distance. I saw someone who deserved to be met with the same courage he showed. She opened the door. And because sometimes the old laws must break so that new truths can be born, she left him then, alone with Healer and his wounds, and the weight of everything still to come. Outside the window, the stars appeared between clouds, cold and distant and utterly uncaring about the fates of warriors and queens, and kingdoms that bloomed and died like flowers in their eternal light. The great hall buzzed with intention like a hive preparing for battle. Every jarl who held oath to Ravensborg had been summoned, 15 men of varying ages and temperaments, each controlling territories that spread from the coast to the mountains. They sat at long tables laden with maps and reports, their faces illuminated by dozens of torches that turned the ancient stones into a cavern of flickering shadows. At the high table sat Queen Astrid, flanked by Bjorn and 2 other advisors, Leif the Wise, who had counselled her father before her, and Hilda, the only female jarl in the kingdom, a woman whose husband had died, young and who had ruled her lands with iron efficiency ever since. The mood was volatile. "You ask us to believe the word of one man," Jarl Erik declared, his voice booming across the hall. "One man who crawled back half dead with tales of impossible armies and united enemies. Where is the proof? Where are the scouts' reports confirming this threat?" "The scouts find nothing, because Harald doesn't want to be found yet," Astrid replied, her voice cutting through the murmur of agreement that followed Eric's words. "He's moving carefully, gathering forces before revealing his hand." "Or," Eric continued, standing now, his bulk casting a great shadow, "your warrior is mad with fever, or he exaggerates to seem more heroic, or he lies to cover his own cowardice." The hall fell silent. The insult hung in the air like drawn steel. Before Astrid could respond, the doors opened, and Thorvald entered. He moved slowly, still healing, but he moved with purpose. He wore simple leather and wool, no armor, no weapons. The queen had ordered him to remain unarmed in the presence of the jarls, but there was something in his bearing, in the way he crossed the hall with every eye upon him, that suggested he needed no steel to be dangerous. "You would question my courage, Jarl Erik?" Thorvald's voice carried clearly, conversationally, as if discussing weather. "Then let me describe for you the faces of your own sworn men as they died. Let me name them one by one, and tell you exactly how they fell, your son among them." Eric's face went white, then red. "My son died with honor, more honor than I hear in your voice now." Thorvald stopped before the high table, his gaze sweeping the assembled jarls. "I watched 300 warriors, your warriors, die in mud and blood because they believed their lords would heed the warning I carried. If you choose to ignore that warning, to call it lies or madness, then their deaths become meaningless. Is that what you wish? To spit on their memory?" The silence grew heavier. Hilda spoke, her voice measured and calm. "Tell us again, warrior. With details this time. If we are to believe and prepare, we must know everything." And so Thorvald told them. He spoke of the ambush, how Harald's forces had been positioned with military precision, how they'd used the terrain to their advantage, how they'd fought with a coordination that spoke of months of training together. He described the banners he'd seen, identifying jarls from territories as far east as the ice seas and as far west as the contested borderlands. He told them numbers, tactics, weaponry. He painted a picture so detailed and specific that doubt began to crack. When he finished, the hall remained quiet. "If this is true," Jarl Magnus finally said, the old warrior leaning forward on his elbows, "then we face an enemy unlike any in living memory. Not raiders, not territorial disputes, but conquest. True conquest." "Yes," Astrid confirmed. "Harald means to rule the north, all of it, and we are merely the first kingdom in his path." "Then we are doomed," Eric muttered. 6 weeks to prepare for an army that size? It's impossible. We cannot call enough warriors, cannot stock enough supplies, cannot surrender." Hilda slammed her hand on the table. "Listen to yourselves. Have we become so soft that at the first true threat we speak of inevitability and doom? Our ancestors held these lands against enemies worse than this. Our ancestors had numbers, another Jarl countered, had allies, had courage, Thorvald interrupted quietly, which I see little of in this hall. The insult would have sparked violence in other circumstances. Here it sparked something else. Shame, perhaps, or anger turned inward. Eric sat down heavily. What would you have us do, warrior? You who claims to have all the answers. I claim nothing, but I'll offer. This. Harold's strength is his alliance, but alliances built on greed are fragile. If we could break that alliance, turn his own Jarls against him. You speak of infiltration, Leif said, his old eyes sharp, of spies and sabotage and the dark arts of scheming. I speak of survival by any means necessary. It could work, Hilda mused. If we had someone who could move among Harold's forces, someone who could sow doubt and discord, someone expendable enough to risk, but valuable enough to be believed. Her eyes moved to Thorvald. So did everyone else's. No, Astrid said flatly. He's barely healed. To send him back into, I'll go. Thorvald's words cut across hers. I'll do whatever is required. You'll die, Bjorn stated. They'll recognize you. You're the one who escaped. They'll kill you on sight, perhaps, but I know their positions now, their movements. I can reach Harold's camp, and once there, he trailed off, the implications clear enough. The Jarls began to argue, some for the plan, some against, some simply wanting to debate for the sake of hearing their own voices. Astrid let them, her mind working through possibilities and impossibilities, weighing lives against kingdoms, honor against survival. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. We will not send Thorvald on a suicide mission. Her voice carried absolute authority. But we will use his knowledge to prepare. We fortify Ravensborg's defenses. We call every warrior from every territory. We send messages to kingdoms beyond Harold's reach, seeking alliances of our own, and we prepare for a siege we cannot win. Eric said, but without the earlier bluster. Now he simply sounded tired. Perhaps not, but we will make Harold pay such a price for Ravensborg that even in victory he will be weakened. We will become the stone that breaks his wave. Astrid stood. And if I must burn this kingdom to ash to keep it from his hands, then I will do so gladly, but I will not surrender, not while I draw breath. The Jarls exchanged glances. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod. Then it's war, Magnus declared. It was always war, Astrid corrected. Now we simply acknowledge it. The council continued late into the night, planning fortifications and troop movements, supply lines and defensive strategies. But in the quiet moments between debates, more than one person wondered if all their planning was simply an elaborate way of choosing how they would die. Outside, the winter stars wheeled in their eternal dance. And in the south, an army prepared to march. Thorvald found the queen on the northern wall 2 hours past midnight. She stood alone, wrapped in furs, against the cutting wind, looking out over the snow-blanketed landscape that stretched endlessly toward horizons she could not see. The moon cast everything in silver and shadow, turning the world into a study of contrasts, light and dark, hope and fear, life and the constant presence of death. He approached quietly, but she heard him anyway. You should be resting, Astrid said without turning. Inga will have my head if you tear your wounds. Inga is welcome to try. Thorvald leaned against the wall beside her. I couldn't sleep. Kept seeing their faces. The men who died, yes. And the ones who will. They stood in silence, 2 people carrying impossible weights, finding strange comfort in shared burdens. In the hall, Astrid finally said, you offered to infiltrate Harold's camp, to walk back into certain death. Why? Thorvald considered the question, watching his breath fog in the frozen air. Because Ragnar died to get me here. Because 300 warriors fell believing their sacrifice would mean something. Because, he paused, because some debts can only be paid in blood and courage, and I have precious little else to offer. You offer more than you know. Astrid's eyes remained fixed on the distant darkness. The Jarls respect you now, fear you perhaps. They see in you something they've lost, a willingness to die for something beyond personal glory. Pretty words for saying I'm useful as a martyr. No, I'm saying you're dangerous. Not because of your skill with a blade, but because you remind them what it means to be truly loyal, and loyalty, warrior, is the most dangerous weapon in any kingdom. Thorvald glanced at her, seeing not the crown or the ceremonial bearing, but the woman beneath, young, brilliant, and utterly alone in ways that no one who hadn't worn such weight could understand. "Why did you refuse to marry?" he asked, the question emerging before he could stop it. "Any of the Jarls would have you. Such a union would bring peace, unity. You could what? Live as a decoration? Birth heirs while men who consider me lesser make all true decisions?" Her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "I've seen what happens to queens who marry for politics. They become ghosts in their own halls. I would rather die defending my kingdom than live watching it stolen from me piece by piece through empty smiles and false respect. So you choose war over compromise. I choose sovereignty over surrender. There's a difference." Wind howled between them, carrying snow that stung exposed skin. "My father," Astrid continued, her voice softening, "was a good king, strong, just, beloved by his people. When he died and left me as heir, the Jarls accepted it because the law was clear. But acceptance and respect are not the same. Every day I prove myself. Every decision is scrutinized, every action questioned. If I married, I would become nothing more than my husband's vessel for legitimacy." "You don't trust easily," Thorvald observed. "Can you blame me? In the south, Harold gathers armies to take my throne. In my own hall, Jarls debate whether I'm fit to rule. Even my advisors," she stopped herself, "even those who love me wonder if marriage wouldn't solve everything." "Would it? Solve everything?" She laughed, the sound bitter as frozen honey. "Marriage to the right Jarl might buy peace, for a year, maybe two, until Harold offered that Jarl a better deal, or until my husband decided he preferred ruling alone, or until the northern lords saw weakness and decided to test our union with steel. No, Thorvald, marriage is not a solution. It's a prettier cage than most, but a cage nonetheless." He understood then. Really understood, the impossible position she occupied. Too young to be given natural authority, too unmarried to be safe, too competent to be ignored, too proud to bend. What if one could have both? He asked quietly. Power and partnership. A union built not on politics but on something else? She turned to look at him fully for the first time. "Are you proposing, warrior?" The question hung between them, half jest and half something far more serious. Thorvald met her gaze. Steadily. "I'm a soldier with no lands, no title, no wealth. I couldn't offer you political advantage or territorial gains. I couldn't give you anything except loyalty that cannot be bought and a sword arm that would die before failing you. So no, my queen, I'm not proposing. I'm simply wondering." Aloud, if such a thing could exist. Something shifted in Astrid's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of honesty so naked it bordered on dangerous. "In another life," she said softly, "in another time when kingdoms didn't hang by threads and armies didn't march on our borders, perhaps such a thing could exist. Perhaps I could choose freely instead of calculating every consequence of every breath I take. But not in this life. No, not in this life." They returned to silence, but it felt different now, less lonely, more understood. "When Harold comes," Thorvald said eventually, "I'll stand on these walls beside you. I'll fight until my last breath, and if we fall, we'll fall as free people. That has to count for something. It counts for everything." Astrid's hand moved, settling briefly on his arm, a gesture so small and so significant that neither acknowledged it, though both felt it. "Thank you, Thorvald, for the warning, for the truth, for standing when it would be easier to run. Where would I run to? This is my home now. These are my people. This," he gestured at the kingdom spread below them, "is worth dying for." "Then let's try very hard not to die." She smiled, and for just a moment looked less like a queen and more like a woman facing impossible odds with nothing but courage and will. At least not until we've made Harold regret ever marching north. They remained on the wall until dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of fire and blood, omens, perhaps, of everything still to come. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the snow, preparation began in earnest. Warriors were called from distant holdings. Smiths worked their forges day and night. Engineers reinforced walls that had stood for generations but would soon face their greatest test. And in the Queen's chambers, maps were spread and plans were made, and two people who had no business finding understanding in such chaos continued to find it anyway, one quiet conversation at a time. But understanding, as they would soon learn, could be both the strongest foundation and the most painful burden. For how do you protect someone you've begun to care for when the entire world prepares to tear them down? 4 weeks passed like water through desperate fingers. Ravensborg transformed into a fortress unlike anything its people had seen in generations. The old walls were reinforced with timber and stone, dragged from quarries that had lain dormant for decades. Ditches were dug beyond the gates, then filled with sharpened stakes that pointed toward the southern roads. Granaries were stocked, wells were deepened, and every able body was put to purpose. Even children learned to carry messages and supplies. The warriors came in groups, 50 from the coastal territories, 30 from the mountain holds, 20 from the eastern farmlands. Never enough, always too few for the task ahead. But they came. And that mattered. Thorvald had become something unexpected in those weeks. Not just a warrior, but a voice that others listened to. He trained the younger fighters, shared what he knew of Harold's tactics, walked the walls each dawn, checking defenses with an eye that missed nothing. The men who had questioned his story in the Great Hall now followed his commands without hesitation. And through it all, he and Astrid found moments, not many, never enough. But in the spaces between councils and preparations, between dawn watches and evening reports, they would meet on the walls, in the armory, once in the library where ancient texts gathered dust. They spoke of strategy and philosophy, of childhood memories and half-formed dreams, of everything except the attraction that had grown between them like fire in dry wood. Both knew it was impossible. Both knew it didn't matter. On the morning of the 28th day, scouts returned with news that stopped every heart in Ravensborg. Harold's army had been spotted, 3 days' march south, moving steadily north like a slow-motion avalanche of steel and flesh. The numbers the scouts reported made strong men pale. 10,000 warriors, perhaps more, enough to surround Ravensborg 3 times over, and still have reserves. The council convened immediately. "We cannot stand against such numbers," Jarl Erik declared, his earlier bluster completely gone. "It's madness to try. We should evacuate while we can. Take the women and children north, disperse into the mountains, and become refugees in our own lands." Hilda's voice cut like a blade. "Hunted through winter, picked off one by one while Harold claims our kingdom unopposed. Better alive than honorably dead. Better dead than enslaved." The argument spiraled, voices rising, tempers fraying under the pressure of impossible choices. Astrid sat silently at the high table, her face unreadable, letting the Jarls exhaust themselves. Beside her, Thorvald stood like a statue, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, returned to him now, as all warriors were armed for the coming battle. Finally, when the shouting had devolved into repetitive circles, the Queen raised her hand. Silence fell like a hammer. "We fight," she said simply. "We fight because that is what free people do when faced with tyranny. We fight because our ancestors built these walls with blood and bone. We fight because surrender is simply a slower death." "My queen," Erik began. "I'm not finished." Her voice carried steel now. "Those who wish to flee may do so. I will not stop you. Take your families, take your goods, head north or east or wherever you believe safety lies. But understand this. If Ravensborg falls because we lack the numbers to defend it, history will remember your names alongside that failure." The rebuke hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. "We stand with you, Magnus declared, his old voice strong. My warriors will hold the eastern gate until death takes us. One by one, the other Jarls echoed the commitment. Even Eric, though his voice shook slightly, pledged his forces to the defense. 3 days, Astrid continued. We have 3 days to complete our preparations. 3 days to make peace with whatever gods we worship. 3 days to become the wall that breaks Harald's ambition. The council dispersed, Jarls moving to their assignments with grim determination. Thorvald remained. Walk with me, Astrid said quietly. They left the great hall, moving through corridors that Thorvald had come to know intimately in the past weeks. The castle felt different now, heavier, as if the very stones understood what approached. They climbed to the highest tower, a place where queens had stood for centuries to look upon their kingdom. The view stretched for miles, forests of pine and spruce, frozen rivers catching sunlight, and in the far distance, the suggestion of mountains that marked the edge of the known world. It's beautiful, Thorvald said. I'd never really looked before, always too busy marching or fighting or surviving to simply see. I come here when decisions become too heavy. Astrid leaned against the stone parapet. My father brought me here as a child, told me that a ruler must love the land more than life itself, because only then can they make the hard choices that leadership demands. He taught you well. He taught me loneliness. The words emerged before she could stop them. How to carry weight that no one else can feel. How to smile when your heart screams. How to choose the kingdom over everything else. Always, no matter the cost. Thorvald moved closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. What if you didn't have to choose alone? She looked at him. Really looked, and something in her expression cracked, just slightly, just enough to reveal the woman beneath the crown. Don't, she whispered, don't make this harder than it already is. Make what harder? This, us, whatever this has become. Her hand gestured between them. In 3 days we face an army that will likely destroy us. In 3 days I may be dead or captured or worse, and here I stand, feeling things I have no right to feel for a warrior with no lands and no title. But who loves you anyway? The confession hung between them like a drawn blade. Astrid's breath caught. You shouldn't. I know. Believe me, I know all the reasons this is impossible. But knowledge doesn't change truth. And the truth is that somewhere between your kneeling in my blood and now, I fell in love with a queen who carries the world on her shoulders and never once complains, who faces doom with courage, who inspires loyalty not through fear, but through being worthy of it. Thorvald, let me finish. His voice remained steady, certain. I don't expect anything. I don't ask for anything. But if we're going to die in 3 days, then I want you to know, to truly know, that you are not alone, that someone sees not just the crown, but the woman wearing it, that someone would die 1,000 deaths before letting harm come to you. Tears gathered in Astrid's eyes, the first tears Thorvald had seen from her, the first crack in the perfect mask she showed the world. I can't, she said, voice breaking. I can't love you back. If I let myself love you, I become weak. I become distracted. I become human. He reached up, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. You become human, Astrid. Not just a queen, but a person with fears and hopes and feelings. And perhaps that's exactly what your people need to see, that their queen fights not just from duty, but from love of something beyond abstract concepts of kingdom and honor. She leaned into his touch, just for a moment, allowing herself the comfort she'd denied herself for so long. If we survive this, she whispered, if somehow we turn back Harald's army and live to see another spring, then we'll face whatever comes together. He pulled her close, and she let him, her forehead resting against his chest. Queen and warrior, two impossible people in an impossible situation, refusing to accept the inevitable. They stood that way for a long moment, the kingdom spread below them, the approaching doom somewhere beyond the horizon, and between them a connection that defied every law and tradition and reasonable thought. As fate turns against our hero, our queen, and all of Ravensborg, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far these voices can travel. How many souls across the world stand with those who refuse to kneel before tyranny? Your strength becomes part of this legend, just as their courage becomes part of history. Finally, Astrid pulled back, wiping her eyes, rebuilding the mask of queenly composure piece by piece. "No one can know," she said. "Not until after. If we're to inspire confidence, if we're to lead them into battle, no one will know," Thorvald agreed. "But when the fighting starts, when Harald's forces break against our walls, know that I fight not just for Ravensborg or duty or honor. I fight for you, for the chance that we might have one more conversation, one more dawn together, one more moment of this impossible connection. Then fight well, my warrior." She smiled through tears. "And I'll try very hard not to let you die for me. I can live with that bargain." They descended from the tower separately, as propriety demanded, returning to their roles as queen and soldier, as leader and defender. But something had shifted, a promise made, a truth acknowledged, a foundation laid for whatever future might remain. That night, Thorvald stood the late watch on the southern wall, and there, in the distance, he saw them, campfires, hundreds of them, thousands, spreading across the southern horizon like stars fallen to earth. Harald's army, closer than the scouts had reported, massive beyond comprehension. The siege would begin not in 3 days, but tomorrow. Thorvald stared at those distant fires, at the doom approaching his adopted home, and felt not fear but resolve crystallizing into something harder than steel. They would fight, they would bleed, and they would make Harald Bloodaxe remember the name Ravensborg for the rest of his cursed life. The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Thorvald had spent the night rousing the garrison, preparing defenses, ensuring every warrior knew their position and purpose. The mood was grim but determined. Men sharpening blades that were already sharp, checking armor that had been checked a dozen times, speaking in low voices to gods and loved ones in their own trembling courage. On the walls, archers assembled their arrows in neat rows. In the courtyard, shield walls practiced formations they could execute in their sleep. In the great hall, the wounded and elderly prepared to serve as last defense should the walls be breached. Contingency no one spoke of, but everyone understood. Astrid moved through it all, like a spirit made flesh. She wore armor now, steel plate over leather, her father's sword at her hip, her hair bound in warrior braids. The crown remained on her head, a statement that she would rule Ravensborg unto her last breath. She spoke to every unit, every group of defenders, offering words that were both honest and inspiring. "I will not lie to you," she told a cluster of young warriors, boys really, some barely old enough to grow beards. "What comes today will test us beyond anything our generation has. And known, many of us will die, perhaps all of us, but we die as free people defending our homes, our families, our right to exist without bending knee to tyrants. That is worth any price." The young warriors nodded, trying to look brave, mostly succeeding. As dawn broke fully, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, Harald's army became visible. The sight stole breath from even the most hardened veterans. They covered the southern fields like a living sea, rank upon rank of warriors, in formations so precise they might have been carved from single stone. Banners flew by the hundreds, each representing a jarl or territory that had joined Harald's cause. In the center, larger than all others, flew the black raven with crown in talons, and at the head of this impossible force rode Harald Bloodaxe himself. Even from the walls, his presence was unmistakable, a giant of a man on a black warhorse, his armor polished to mirror brightness, his red cloak flowing behind him like blood in water. He rode forward alone, stopping just beyond arrow range, studying the walls of Ravensborg with eyes that promised conquest. Astrid stood on the gate tower, Thorvald and Bjorn flanking her, all three watching as Harald dismounted and walked forward another 20 paces. His voice, when he spoke, carried with unnatural clarity, either blessed by gods or simply trained to project across battlefields. "Queen Astrid of Ravensborg." Harald's tone was almost friendly, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "I am Harald, soon to be king of all the northern lands. I come to offer you terms of surrender." "I'm listening," Astrid called back, her voice equally clear. Your kingdom is surrounded. Your warriors number perhaps 1,000. Mine number 10,000 and more still arriving. You cannot win. You cannot escape. You can only choose how this ends. And what ending do you offer? Kneel. Swear fealty to me as your king. Allow my forces entry to Ravensborg. In exchange, I guarantee your life and the lives of your people. You'll be stripped of crown and title, of course, but you'll live. Isn't life preferable to pointless death? The words drifted across the frozen ground between armies. Astrid was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, every defender of Ravensborg held their breath. Your offer is generous, she finally said. More generous than I expected from a man called Bloodaxe, but I must decline. Even from a distance, Harold's laugh could be heard, a booming sound that held genuine amusement. You choose death over survival, pride over wisdom. I choose freedom over chains. No matter how comfortable those chains might appear, Astrid's voice rang with conviction. I choose to stand rather than kneel. I choose to fight for what is mine by right and law, rather than surrender it to ambition dressed as inevitability. You call it pride, Harold. I call it sovereignty. Then you're a fool, perhaps, but I'll be a free fool, which is worth more than being a living slave. Harold's expression shifted, respect mixed with something darker. So be it. He remounted his horse with fluid grace. When we break your walls and burn your kingdom, when your warriors lie dead and your people are scattered, remember that you chose this. Remember that I offered mercy. And when my warriors make your army bleed for every inch of ground, Astrid countered, when you count your dead and find the price of Ravensborg higher than you ever imagined, remember that you could have stayed in your eastern territories and lived in peace. This war is yours. Harold, the blood spilled is on your hands alone. Then let the blood flow. He turned his horse and rode back to his lines. For a heartbeat, the world held perfectly still. Then Harold raised his hand and let it fall. The army surged forward like a breaking dam. Shields! Thorvald's command rang. Across the walls. The defenders locked into position, shields overlapping, spears bristling forward, archers drawing strings taut. The coordinated movement was beautiful in its precision, a dance practiced so often it had become instinct. Harold's first wave consisted of archers, hundreds of them, loosing arrows that darkened the sky like a storm of death. The defenders raised shields, creating a roof of wood and leather that arrows struck like metallic rain. Some found gaps, punching through to flesh and bone. Men screamed and fell, but the line held. Return fire, came the command from the archer captain. Ravensborg's bowmen rose as one, loosing their own volley, then dropping back behind cover. The arrows arced high and fell among Harold's advancing infantry, finding targets, drawing first blood. The second wave came faster, warriors with ladders and ropes, charging the walls in a coordinated assault. They moved with discipline that spoke of months of training, a unified force that knew exactly what to do and when to do it. The defenders met them with steel and fury. Ladders were pushed away with long poles, sending climbers tumbling to the ground below. Boiling water and hot sand rained down from murder holes, causing screams that cut through the chaos. Spears thrust down at upturned faces. Arrows found throats and eyes at point-blank range. But for every attacker who fell, two more took their place. Thorvald moved along the walls like a demon, appearing wherever the defense faltered, his sword cutting through enemies who managed to crest the battlements. He fought with economy of motion, no wasted movements, no dramatic flourishes, just efficient killing that came from decades of hard-won experience. Beside him, warriors half his age struggled to match his pace. Hours blended into nightmare. The sun climbed toward noon, then descended toward evening, and still Harold's forces came. They attacked in waves, each one slightly different, testing the defenses, looking for weaknesses, wearing down the defenders through sheer relentless pressure. Bodies piled at the base of the walls. The snow turned red, then black with blood. The air filled with smoke from burning siege equipment and the copper-sharp scent of opened veins. And through it all, on the gate tower, Queen Astrid stood visible to all, a beacon of defiance that refused to bend. She didn't fight. Directly, not yet. That wasn't her role. Her role was to be seen, to remind every defender what they fought for, to stand unbroken while the world tried to break her, and she performed that role flawlessly, though Thorvald could see the cost in her eyes each time they met across the chaos. As darkness finally fell, Harold sounded the retreat. The army withdrew beyond arrow range, leaving their dead where they'd fallen, a deliberate insult, refusing even to recover their own. On the walls, the defenders slumped with exhaustion. They'd held. For one day against impossible odds, they'd held. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. The true test was still to come. Night brought no peace. Harold kept the defenders awake with intermittent attacks, small forces rushing the walls, loosing arrows, then retreating before real defense could be organized. It was psychological warfare, denying rest, grinding down will and spirit. In the Great Hall, the wounded were treated by every healer in Ravensborg. The floor was covered with injured men, some who would recover, some who wouldn't, all bearing the marks of Harold's ambition. The sounds of pain filled the space where beasts had once been held, a grim transformation that spoke to how completely war had consumed everything. Astrid moved among them, offering water and words, touching hands and foreheads, giving what comfort a queen could offer to those who'd bled in her name. Thorvald found her there near midnight, kneeling beside a young warrior who couldn't have seen more than 18 summers. The boy's chest was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, his breathing shallow and labored. "My queen," the boy whispered. Did we hold? We held." Astrid's voice was gentle as snowfall. "You fought with courage that would make the gods themselves proud. My mother, tell her. I'll tell her myself. I promise." The boy smiled, then his eyes closed for the final time. Astrid sat back on her heels, her hand still holding his, her face perfectly composed despite the devastation that must be raging. Inside her, Thorvald approached quietly. "You should rest. Even queens need sleep." "Sleep?" She looked up at him, something brittle in her expression. "How do I sleep when every hour brings more deaths, when every decision I make costs lives? By remembering that every death here is chosen. Every warrior on these walls chose to stand. They believe in you, in Ravensborg, in the right to be free. That belief is worth dying for." She rose, moving to the window where moonlight painted the world in silver and shadow. 17 died today," she said quietly. 17 that we know of. More will die tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until either Harold breaks through or gives up. How many deaths until it becomes too many? How much blood until I should have accepted his terms? Thorvald moved beside her. "You know the answer to that." "Do I?" Because standing here, looking at boys who will never become men, wives who will never see husbands again, children who will grow up without fathers, I wonder if my pride is worth their lives. It's not pride. His voice was firm. It's principle. If you surrender now, Harold learns that overwhelming force wins every time. He'll use the same tactics on the next kingdom and the next, until the entire north kneels to his will. But if we stand, if we make him bleed, if we prove that conquest has a cost too high for even his ambition, then we save not just Ravensborg, but every territory that might face similar threats. Pretty words. But there was no heat in her accusation. True words. You're not fighting for pride, Astrid. You're fighting for the idea that people have the right to govern themselves. That might doesn't make right. That courage in the face of impossible odds matters. Those ideas don't die even if we do. She was quiet for a long moment, processing, weighing, carrying weight that would crush most people. "Stay with me tonight," she finally said. "Not as queen and warrior, just as two people who might not see another dawn. Stay and remind me why this matters." They moved to her chambers, not to the damaged great hall, but to the private rooms that had once been sanctuary and now felt like a final refuge. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with tapestries depicting Ravensborg's history. They sat together, not touching beyond their shoulders, pressing close, and talked. Through the darkness. About childhood memories and first battles, about favorite foods and hated duties, about dreams for futures that might never come, and regrets for pasts that couldn't be changed. They spoke of everything and nothing, two souls connecting in the space between one day's death and the next day's dawn. "Tell me about your family," Astrid asked as the fire burned lower. "Father was a fisherman, died when I was 12. Storm took his boat. Mother raised me and my sister alone. Did her best, but we were poor, no prospects. So I joined the warrior's path. Figured it was better than starving. Do you regret it?" "Sometimes. Mostly when I'm cold and bleeding," he smiled. "But it brought me here, to this moment, to you. So no, I don't regret it." "And your sister," pain crossed his face, "married a farmer up north. They were happy. Then 3 winters ago, raiders came. By the time I heard and could reach them," he didn't finish, didn't need to. Astrid's hand found his. "I'm sorry. It's why I fight. Why I'll keep fighting until my last breath. Because no one else should lose what I lost. No other child should watch their family burn, while kingdoms argue about borders. And pride." They lapsed into silence again, hands linked, watching the fire die. "If we survive," Astrid said quietly, "I'm going to do something outrageous." "What?" "I'm going to marry a common warrior with no lands and no title and watch the Jarl's faces turn purple with outrage." Thorvald laughed, a genuine sound that seemed impossible in such dark times. "They'll revolt. Let them. I've spent my entire reign proving myself, defending my right to rule, justifying every decision. Maybe it's time I simply did what I wanted and dared the world to object." Dangerous philosophy for a queen. "I'm learning from a dangerous warrior." They sat that way until dawn, began painting the eastern windows with hints of rose and gold, the colors of blood and fire, promise and warning. When the sun fully rose, they separated, returning to their roles, rebuilding their walls of propriety and position. But something had changed. Solidified. A promise unspoken but absolutely real. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The second day of siege began with a new horror. Harold had constructed siege towers during the night. Massive wooden structures on wheels, tall enough to reach the top of Ravensborg's walls. They rolled forward at dawn, pushed by dozens of warriors and covered with wet hides to resist fire. "Fire arrows!" came the command. But the defenders already knew. They loosed flaming shafts by the hundreds, trying to ignite the towers before they reached the walls. Most arrows bounced harmlessly off the soaked hides. A few found purchase, starting small fires that were quickly extinguished by Harold's forces. The towers came on, inexorable as fate. When they reached the walls, bridges dropped from their tops, creating pathways for attackers to pour directly onto. The battlements. Fresh warriors, not exhausted by climbing ladders, not vulnerable during ascent, rushed across in organized formations. The fighting became desperate. Thorvald led the defense of the northern tower breach, his sword rising and falling with mechanical precision. Around him, Ravensborg's warriors fought with the fury of those defending their final stand. They pushed the attackers back, step by bloody step, but for every enemy killed, another appeared. On the eastern wall, Jarl Magnus fell with an axe in his chest, still swinging his own blade even as death took him. His warriors roared with grief and rage, fighting twice as hard to honor their fallen lord. On the southern gate, young Sven, the Queen's advisor who had once questioned Thorvald's story, stood in the gate tunnel itself, holding the line when attackers broke through the first barrier. He killed 7 men before a spear took him in the throat. His last act was to kick the support beam holding the inner gate, collapsing it onto the enemy and sealing the breach with rubble and bodies. Everywhere, heroes rose and fell. Everywhere, the impossible odds ground against courage and determination. By midday, the defenders had been pushed back from 2 sections of the wall. Harold's forces established footholds, bringing more warriors across the siege bridges, expanding their positions with disciplined aggression. Astrid made a decision that went against every advisor's counsel. She took up her sword and joined the fighting. Bjorn tried to stop her. "My queen, if you fall, if I hide while my people die, I'm already fallen." She pushed past him, climbing to the contested section of wall where Thorvald's forces were being overwhelmed. Her arrival transformed the defense. The warriors saw their queen, crown still on her head, sword in hand, fighting alongside them, and something broke open in their hearts. The fatigue that had been dragging at them vanished. The fear that had been whispering surrender went silent. They fought not as individual warriors, but as single living weapon, moving, with coordination that bordered on the supernatural. Astrid fought with skill that surprised even Thorvald. Her father had trained her well, and desperation had honed that training to razor edge. She wasn't the strongest fighter or the fastest, but she was clever and fearless, using enemy momentum against them, finding gaps in defenses, never staying still long enough to become a target. Thorvald stayed near her, his entire focus narrowed to a single purpose, keeping her alive. He didn't think about the larger battle, didn't consider strategy or tactics, simply moved to intercept any threat that came close to the woman he loved, his blade becoming an extension of that singular devotion. Together, they pushed back the enemy advance. The foothold on the northern wall was retaken, though the cost was staggering. Of the 50 defenders who had held that section at dawn, only 20 remained alive by the time Harold called the midday retreat. In the brief respite, as both sides caught their breath and tended wounds, a messenger arrived, a scout, pale and wide-eyed, stumbling into the courtyard where Astrid and her remaining advisors had gathered. "Ships," the scout gasped out. "In the harbour, dozens of them." Every heart stopped. The harbour. They'd been so focused on the southern land approach that they'd left the northern harbour defended by only a skeleton force. If Harold had sent ships around the coast, if he was attacking from 2 directions, whose ships? Bjorn demanded. I couldn't see the banners clearly, but they're not Harold's, different colours, and they're landing warriors. How many? Hundreds, maybe 1,000. They're forming up on the beach, moving toward the northern gate. It was over then, caught between Harold's massive army to the south and this new force to the north. Ravensborg would be crushed like grain between millstones. Astrid felt the moment, the exact instant when hope died in the eyes of her advisors, when even the bravest warriors began to accept the inevitable. She refused to accept it. "Thorvald," she said calmly, "take 50 warriors to the northern gate. Whatever force landed there, make them pay for every step. The rest of us will hold the southern walls. If we're to fall, we fall fighting." "My queen," Bjorn began. "That's an order." Thorvald met her eyes. In that look was everything they'd shared, everything they'd promised, everything that might have been. "As you command," he said formally. Then, lower, only for her, "Don't die before I get back." "Same to you, warrior." He gathered his forces and raced toward the northern gate, his mind already calculating angles of defense, positioning, how to make 50 men hold against 1,000. It couldn't be done, but he would try anyway. That was what love demanded. The impossible, always the impossible, attempted anyway. Thorvald reached the northern gate expecting to find it under assault. Instead, he found it standing open, and the warriors who had landed from the ships were not attacking. They were standing at attention, formed into orderly ranks, their banners finally visible in the afternoon light. Blue and silver, a running stag, the colours of the Frostmark Kingdom, the territories far to the northeast that traded with Ravensborg but had never involved themselves in southern politics. At the head of this force stood a woman in armour that caught the sun like captured ice, Lady Sigrid of Frostmark, whose reputation as both warrior and diplomat had reached even Ravensborg's distant halls. She was known for her strategic brilliance, her unwillingness to suffer fools, and her absolute commitment to honour above all else. She saw Thorvald approaching with his 50 warriors and smiled, a sharp, fierce expression that suggested she found something amusing in the situation. "You must be Thorvald the Unbroken," she called out. "The man who crawled back from death to warn his queen. The rumours do you justice." Thorvald stopped, his mind racing, trying to understand. "Lady Sigrid, your forces, you're not with Harold, with that ambitious snake?" She laughed. Never. I'm here to make sure he fails. I don't understand. Then let me explain simply. Sigrid gestured to her warriors. Harald's plan to unite the north under his rule is brilliant in its audacity and terrible in its implications. If he succeeds here, takes Ravensborg, he'll turn toward the other independent territories. My kingdom would be next on his list. So this is self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. Sigrid's smile never wavered. I fight Harald here because it's easier than fighting him later at my own gates. But also, her expression grew serious, because I'll be damned before I let a tyrant destroy a queen. Who has the courage to stand? Your Astrid has earned respect across the north. Many of us have been waiting to see if she would bend. She won't. I know. That's why I'm here. Thorvald felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Fragile as new ice, but real. How many warriors did you bring? 1,200. Not enough to turn the tide completely, but enough to make a difference, enough to make Harald question his certainty. She nodded toward the southern walls, where sounds of resumed fighting echoed. Now take me to your queen. We have a battle to plan. They moved quickly through Ravensborg's streets, Sigrid's forces following in perfect formation. The townspeople who had been hiding in cellars emerged to stare, uncertain whether to fear or celebrate this unexpected arrival. On the southern wall, the fighting had resumed. Harald had seen the ships arrive and was pressing his advantage, trying to break through before this new force could be deployed. The intensity of the assault had doubled, desperation replacing the earlier methodical approach. Astrid stood in the midst of it, her armor dented and splashed with blood, her sword arm never stopping. She fought like the cornered predator she'd become, all fury and precision, and absolute refusal to yield. When Thorvald reached her with Sigrid, the relief that flooded Astrid's face, quickly hidden, told him everything about how close they'd been to breaking. Lady Sigrid, Astrid's voice remained steady despite her labored breathing. Your timing is impeccable. Had to make an entrance. Sigrid surveyed the walls, the battle, the defenders on the edge of collapse. Here's what I propose. My forces hit Harald's eastern flank, where he's weakest because he concentrated forces toward the walls. We break his formation, force him to divide his attention. While he's reacting, your warriors push out from the gates in a controlled sortie. We catch him between hammer and anvil. It's risky, Bjorn objected. If the sortie fails, everything is risky. Astrid cut him off. But this gives us our first real chance. She looked at Sigrid. Why are you doing this, really? Because 12 years ago, your father sheltered my family when we fled political enemies. He asked nothing in return, expected no payment, simply offered sanctuary because it was right. Sigrid's eyes held old memory and current conviction. Debts matter, Queen Astrid. Honor matters, and sometimes the right side is obvious if you're not blinded by ambition. Astrid nodded slowly. Then we fight together. The plan was set in motion with desperate speed. Sigrid's forces moved out through the northern gate, circling wide, through forests and hills to reach Harald's eastern position. They moved with practiced silence, using terrain and fading daylight to mask their approach. Inside Ravensborg, the sortie force assembled, 300 warriors, everyone who could still stand and fight. They would wait for Sigrid's attack, then burst through the southern gates in coordinated assault. Astrid insisted on leading the sortie herself. Every advisor objected. Thorvald objected, but she was unmovable. My warriors die in my name, she said quietly. The least I can do is risk the same death beside them. As evening approached, the moment came. Sigrid's forces hit Harald's eastern flank like an avalanche of steel and fury. The attack was complete surprise. Harald had been so focused on Ravensborg's walls that he'd left his periphery defended by only scattered units. The eastern ranks collapsed, warriors fleeing or dying, the careful formation breaking into chaos. Now, Astrid commanded. The southern gates flew open and Ravensborg's sortie force charged out, a wedge of desperate courage aimed at Harald's command center. They crashed into the army's center, driving deep, cutting through ranks that were too surprised to mount organized defense. For the first time since the siege began, Ravensborg's forces held initiative. For the first time, Harold tasted fear. Thorvald stayed at Astrid's side as he'd promised, his sword clearing path for her advance. They fought as one being. Where she moved, he protected. Where he struck, she followed through. It was partnership forged in fire, trust absolute beyond question. They drove forward, seeking Harold himself. If they could reach him, if they could end this with single combat. But Harold was not fool enough to be caught. The moment he saw the sortie's direction, he pulled back, surrounding himself with elite guards, withdrawing toward his main reserves. The moment of advantage passed. Harold's forces began to regroup, their superior numbers reasserting control. The sortie force found itself surrounded, cut off from the gates. "Back!" Astrid commanded. "Fighting retreat! Back to the walls!" The retreat became nightmare, step by step, fighting every inch, leaving dead and wounded, barely holding formation. Sigrid's forces drove in from the flank again, creating opening just wide enough for the sortie to escape back through the gates. They made it by margins measured in heartbeats and blood. The gates slammed shut behind the last warrior. On the walls, the defenders looked down at battlefield transformed. Hundreds of Harold's warriors lay dead or dying. The snow was churned to red mud. The siege towers stood abandoned, their bridges broken, but Harold's army remained. Diminished, bloodied, but still vastly outnumbering the combined forces of Ravensborg and Frostmark. It wasn't victory, but it was survival, and in that moment, that was enough. The night after Sigrid's arrival, Harold requested parley. The request came through a messenger who approached under white flag, a tradition so old that even enemies at war respected it. Harold proposed meeting at dawn, on neutral ground between armies, with 3 representatives from each side. Astrid agreed. She chose Thorvald and Bjorn to accompany her. Harold brought 2 jarls whose territories he'd absorbed, men who looked uncomfortable in their alliance, eyes constantly darting toward exits that didn't exist. They met as the sun broke the horizon, painting everything in gold and promise. Harold looked older than he had 2 days before. The assault on Ravensborg had cost him dearly, over 1,000 warriors dead, twice that number wounded, and his reputation as invincible conqueror shattered by a queen who refused to kneel. "You've made your point," Harold said without preamble. "You can't be taken by direct assault without cost. I'm unwilling to pay. And now with Frostmark allied to your defense," he trailed off, something like respect in his expression. "I'm prepared to offer new terms." "I'm listening," Astrid said, giving nothing away. "Withdraw my forces. Recognize Ravensborg's independence. No claims on your territory. No demands for fealty." He paused. "In exchange, you recognize my rule over the territories I've already claimed. No interference, no challenges, no alliances specifically formed against me. You're asking me to legitimize your conquests by accepting them. I'm asking for mutual peace. You keep your kingdom. I keep mine. The alternative is continued war that benefits neither of us." Astrid studied him. This man who had killed hundreds of her warriors, who had threatened everything she held dear, who represented everything she despised about naked ambition. "The jarls whose lands you've taken," she said, carefully, "do they support this peace?" The 2 jarls with Harold shifted uncomfortably. Neither spoke. "Their support is evolving," Harold said diplomatically. "I see." Astrid turned to those jarls directly. "You stand with him by choice or by force?" "Does it matter?" one finally muttered. We adapted. "It matters to me. It matters whether I'm negotiating with a true king or a warlord enforcing obedience through fear." The accusation hung in the morning air. Harold's jaw tightened. "You dare—" "I dare everything," Astrid interrupted. "I've proven that thoroughly. Now answer my question. Do you rule by consent or conquest?" The silence stretched painful and long. Finally, Harold exhaled. "Both. I rule by both. Some territories joined willingly, attracted by promise of stability and wealth. Others," he gestured vaguely, "others required convincing, honest at least." Astrid looked back to her own advisers, to Thorvald, whose hand rested near his sword, to Bjorn, whose old eyes held calculation. "Your terms are acceptable," she said finally, "with conditions. Name them. First, any territory that wishes to leave your rule must be permitted to do so without penalty. You rule by consent, not chains. Harold's expression darkened. That could destabilize everything. Then perhaps you should focus on being a ruler worth staying with. Second condition, you establish formal borders and swear before witnesses that you will not expand beyond them. Your ambition ends here and now, and if I refuse these conditions, then we continue fighting until one of us is dead. Your forces will eventually break our walls, but the cost will cripple you. Every remaining kingdom will see how much blood Ravensborg made you shed, and they'll calculate their own chances of resistance. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting wars of attrition. The truth of her words was undeniable. Harold had learned the hard way that some prizes were too expensive to claim, even in victory. Third condition, Astrid continued, establish trade agreements between all territories. If we're to have peace, let it be profitable peace that binds us through mutual interest rather than fear. You negotiate like you fight, Harold observed, something approaching admiration in his voice. Without mercy, I negotiate for my people's future. Mercy is a luxury we can't afford. More silence. Harold's companions shifted. Thorvald remained perfectly still, ready to fight if this parley turned to treachery. Finally, Harold nodded. Your conditions are acceptable. We'll formalize the treaties within the week, with witnesses from every involved territory. The siege ends today. Then we have peace. Astrid extended her hand. Harold clasped it, the grip of equals recognizing each other's strength. You would have made a terrifying conqueror yourself, Harold said quietly. The North is fortunate you chose defense over ambition. The North is fortunate I chose freedom over power. She released his hand. Now withdraw your forces. We'll speak again when documents are prepared. The parley ended. Harold rode back to his army, which began breaking camp within the hour. The siege towers were abandoned, the ladders left to rot. By noon, the first units were marching south, their banners no longer threats, but simply flags marking retreat. On Ravensborg's walls, the defenders watched them go with expressions mixing relief, disbelief, and exhaustion too deep for words. They had survived, against all odds, against every reasonable expectation they had survived. The celebrations that night were subdued. Too many dead to honor, too much pain to simply ignore in favor of revelry. But there was satisfaction, a sense of achievement earned through blood and courage. Sigrid's forces remained for the following week, helping repair damages and ensuring Harold kept his word. The Lady of Frostmark and Queen Astrid formed a bond that went beyond alliance. Friendship forged in shared battle. Mutual respect between rulers who understood the weight of crowns. You'll visit Frostmark? Sigrid asked before her departure. Once things have settled? I will, Astrid promised. And you're always welcome in Ravensborg. You saved us. That debt can never be fully repaid. Debts between friends aren't meant to be repaid. Sigrid smiled, just honored by being worthy of them. The ships left on the morning tide, carrying warriors back to northern homes, leaving Ravensborg to heal and rebuild. A month passed before Astrid made her outrageous decision official. The Jarls were summoned to the Great Hall, now repaired, the bloodstains scrubbed away, the dead properly honored in the burial grounds beyond the walls. They came expecting discussion, of reconstruction, of treaties and trade agreements. Instead, they found their queen standing before them, with Thorvald at her side, both dressed in ceremonial garments. I have an announcement, Astrid said, her voice carrying that quality of absolute certainty that had seen her through siege and war. I'm taking a husband. The hall exploded with excited murmurs. This was what they'd wanted, what they'd pushed for. The queen finally accepting the need for political marriage, for stability through alliance. His name is Thorvald, Astrid continued, gesturing to the warrior beside her. Some of you know him as the man who brought warning of Harold's approach. Others know him as the warrior who fought on our walls. I know him as the man who has earned my trust, my respect, and my love. The murmurs died. Silence replaced them. Shocked, uncertain silence. My queen, Eric finally ventured, his face purple. This man has no lands, no title, he has courage, he has honor, he has loyalty that cannot be bought or swayed. Those qualities are worth more than all the lands in the north. Her voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath it. I've proven I can lead. I've proven I can defend our kingdom. I've proven every accusation of weakness wrong. Now I choose for myself, not for politics. The Jarls will never accept, someone began. The Jarls will accept or find themselves in violation of oaths sworn to their queen. Astrid's eyes swept the assembly. I ask nothing from you, except what you've already sworn, loyalty to Ravensborg's throne. Whether that throne is held by me alone or by me and my chosen husband changes nothing about your obligations. Bjorn stepped forward, the old advisor who had questioned so many of her decisions. My queen speaks truth, he said, clearly. She has led us through our darkest hour. She has earned the right to choose her own path. And this warrior, Bjorn looked at Thorvald, this warrior has proven himself in ways that matter more than bloodlines or holdings. I support this union. One by one, others echoed the support. Not all. Eric remained silent, his face still purple with outrage. A few others looked uncomfortable, uncertain, but the majority, swayed by what they'd witnessed during the siege, by the example of courage that had saved them all, nodded acceptance. The wedding took place the following week. Not a grand affair with diplomatic guests and political maneuvering, but a simple ceremony in Ravensborg's ancient temple, witnessed by warriors and townsfolk who had fought together, bled together, survived together. Thorvald stood in borrowed finery, uncomfortable but honored, while Astrid wore white silk that concealed the healing wounds she'd earned on the walls. The priestess who performed the ceremony was the same healer Inga who had saved Thorvald's life, now blessing their union with words older than memory. Two souls, forged in fire, Inga intoned, bound not by politics or convenience, but by choice, by love that stands against impossible odds and refuses to break, by the courage to defy expectation in service of truth. They exchanged vows, promises spoken quietly, but meant with absolute conviction. When the ceremony ended and they emerged into afternoon sunlight, the gathered crowd cheered, not the polite applause of political obligation, but genuine celebration from people who had found hope in the most unexpected place. As night fell and celebrations continued in the streets below, Thorvald and Astrid stood once more on the northern tower, the place where so many truths had been spoken, where their impossible connection had first been acknowledged. Do you regret it? Astrid asked, leaning against him. Marrying a queen, taking on all the complications and dangers and political nightmares that come with me. I regret nothing, his arm wrapped around her, though I reserve the right to complain about boring councils and diplomatic dinners. She laughed, the sound lighter than he'd ever heard from her. What happens now? Thorvald asked. We've survived war. We've built peace. We've defied tradition. What's next? We rule. Astrid's voice carried quiet determination. We rebuild Ravensborg better than it was. We honor the treaties with Harold while remaining vigilant. We strengthen alliances with kingdoms like Frostmark. We prove that a queen and her warrior husband can lead as well as any traditional pairing. She paused. And we live, Thorvald. After all the death and battle and sacrifice, we simply live. I can support that plan. They stood together as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed countless rises and falls of kingdoms, countless love stories and tragedies, countless moments of human triumph against impossible odds. Ravensborg had survived. Its queen had chosen love over politics, and in that choice, in that defiance of expectation, something new had been born. A kingdom that valued courage over bloodlines, competence over tradition, and the radical idea that rulers could be both strong and human, both feared and loved. The North would never be the same, and that, Astrid thought as she stood in her warrior's arms, was exactly as it should be. If this journey moved you, if the courage of those who refused to kneel, if the love that defied all tradition, if the victory earned through blood and determination touched something in your heart, leave a like, subscribe, and share in the comments what moved you most. Your voice keeps these legends alive. Your strength becomes part of the story, just as their strength became part of history. For in the end, Legends are not born from easy victories or predictable outcomes. They are born from impossible choices, from standing when standing seems foolish, from loving when love seems dangerous, from refusing to accept that might makes right, or that tradition must always rule over truth. They are born from moments like these, when a wounded warrior collapsed at a queen's feet, and instead of following every law and custom, she knelt in his blood and asked what he had seen. That choice changed everything, as all brave choices do.